grandpa stole his first buggy in 1892. I met your grandma pig slopping in 46.
Oh, every Christmas we'd visit my Uncle Fred in prison.
And welcome, America, to America's Family History Show, Extreme Genes and ExtremeGenes.com. It is Fisher here, your radio root sleuth, on the program where we shake your family tree and watch the nuts fall out. Well, we got some real Hall of Famers on today. First of all, coming up in about 10 minutes, we're going to talk to the lead DNA specialist over at our sponsors at Legacy Tree Genealogist. Paul Woodbury is going to come on. He's got tips and tricks for DNA matches. You know how many times you find a DNA match? They're a good one, it looks like, but there's no tree there. What do you do? How do you figure out how they're tied in? What's the connection? Paul's got some ideas for you. Then later in the show, Bill Griffith, the former financial TV news reporter, is coming back on. Bill, of course, 10 years ago, was the guy that found out that his father was not his birth father, and it changed his world. It just rocked it, and he came out with a book about the experience called Stranger in My Genes. It's pretty standard in the genealogy world these days. Well, he's got a follow-up to that about what has happened since. It's called Strangers No More, and Bill will tell you all about that a little bit later on in the show. Hey, if you haven't signed up for our weekly Genie newsletter yet, boy, we got a lot of people following, and we'd love to have you be part of it. We've got blogs from me each week, plus links to past and present shows and links to stories you'll really appreciate as a family historian. Just go to our Facebook page or extremegenes.com to sign up. It's absolutely free. Right now, it's time to head out to Boston, where David Allen Lambert is standing by. He is the chief genealogist of the New England Historic Genealogical Society and AmericanAncestors.org. How you doing, Dave?
Hey, I'm enjoying summer. How about yourself? Are you keeping busy with any genealogy?
Count on it. You know, I had a little COVID this past week, and I figured, okay, the best way to keep busy was to do a little research. Nothing particular in mind, but I found a couple of new indexes that are very helpful for people who have New York ancestry.
Oh, do tell.
Yeah, both of them are on Ancestry.com. The almshouse records of New York have now been indexed, and that led me to find that my third great-grandfather on one line, Oliver Secord, had died in the lunatic asylum in New York City in 1836. He'd been in and out of there, brought in by the police. I mean, quite a story there. I was really shocked to find it. Then I got to research, okay, where was the insane asylum at that time? It's right where Columbia University is today, at Broadway at 116th Street. So that was really new and interesting. And then furthermore, Ancestry has indexed New York's jury censuses. And I'd never heard of these things before, and I've been researching.
I've never heard of them either.
No, I've been researching for like 4 decades there. Well, it turns out that the city was looking to identify people who could potentially serve on juries. And so they created this census of the city in 1816. They did it again in 1819 and 1821. I had 3 families living in the city at that time, and all 3 of them appeared in at least one of these jury censuses. So it gives their names, their occupation, where they lived. It tells you how many males and females were living in the household at the time, and any reason they shouldn't be considered as a juror. So it was really interesting stuff, kept me really busy, and now that I'm feeling better, of course, I'm writing stuff up on that for my own family's use. So a lot of fun. Check it out. It's available through Ancestry with the indexes, but the original images you can find through the Department of Records in New York City. Just go to their website.
Well, you never know what you're going to find online when you've got time to kill. And you know, genealogy is one of those things that you stumble upon some of the best databases, sometimes purely by accident.
Yep.
Well, the Library of Congress put a lovely post out on social media I thought I'd share with you. They're using digital technology, and they were going over a word in a draft of the Declaration of Independence by Thomas Jefferson. And in the draft, it says under our fellow citizens, it really says our fellow subjects.
Wow, really?
Well, think about it. We were the British subjects, so it would have been more of a common thing that would have slipped off your tongue back then.
Yeah.
But yeah, they've used scanning, and it's rather fascinating. You look at it quickly, you might not see it, but there was like some smudging going on, so they cleaned it up and then all of a sudden found the letters underneath it and then brought those out and got rid of the word that was copied over, and you can clearly see the word subjects.
Cool.
So I think digital technology is amazing. Well, in the county of Bucks in the great state of Pennsylvania, they have found a cave. Now, this is not just any old cave. This is a cave where Revolutionary War outlaws were hanging out and may have even included British spies, armed thieves, a group called the Doane Gang. Yeah, not gangs from out west, but from Pennsylvania. And they've already dug fish 18 feet into the ground. Apparently, the Doane brothers robbed the county treasury in 1781 and escaped with all of its funds, and the loot still has not been found till this day.
That's awesome. What a fun adventure.
Well, if you've ever followed the series Band of Brothers, the last of the Band of Brothers who parachuted into France on D-Day has passed, and that is Bradford Freeman at the age of 97.
Great loss, but boy, what great men. And we're going to remember them forever, especially with that TV series.
True. It was a great series. They did lots of interviews, so we've got that captured, which is great. Well, you know, in April of this year, an unmanned vessel set forth on a voyage that had already occurred over 400 years ago, retracing the route of the Mayflower. This vessel just arrived in the past couple of weeks in Plymouth Harbor. No pilgrims on board this time, though. IBM created it. They had some glitches. They had to stop in the Azores and stop in Halifax, Nova Scotia. But if you think about it, the Mayflower kind of got knocked off course, too. And so I guess 400 years later, technology hasn't changed too much. Well, that's what I have from Beantown this week. And don't forget, if you're not a member of American Ancestors, you could save $20 with a coupon code EXTREME on AmericanAncestors.org. Talk to you in a bit.
All right, David, thank you so much. Yes, we'll have your questions with Ask Us Anything coming up at the back end of the show. And on the way next, the lead DNA specialist from over at our sponsors at Legacy Tree Genealogist, Paul Woodbury, giving his tips and tricks for DNA matches when we return in 3 minutes on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show.
Have you hit a brick wall in your family tree? Are you unsure how to use your DNA test results to resolve a research question? Do you want to travel where your ancestors walked and need to find details before you go? Need help joining a lineage society? Whatever your genealogy research question, the answer is Legacy Tree Genealogist. Legacy Tree Genealogist has been helping clients all over the globe discover their story since 2004. Legacy Tree has carefully selected and trained professionals who specialize in hundreds of countries and languages, as well as probate research and DNA analysis. And when you need experts on the ground in the countries where your ancestors came from, Legacy Tree Genealogists calls upon its global network of on-site researchers who know the local language and how to get their hands on the records you need. Request your free quote today at legacytree.com. That's legacytree.com.
Genies, 10 years ago, in April of 2012, when the government released the 1940 census, it took Ancestry several months to complete and review an accurate index. Fast forward to today. Using proprietary handwriting reading software, it took Ancestry only 9 days to get the job done with the 1950 census. Now, they held back results for a time for actual humans to review what the software had created. And after just a few weeks, it became obvious the software was near perfect, and the computer-generated index to 153,000 names has been released. What does this mean in your journey to research your family? It means you can search the entire database quickly and easily for your family members. Never has a U.S. Census Index been created as quickly as this. Go to Ancestry.com today, click on the 1950 census on the homepage, and see what you can discover. Hey Genies, as we've dug into our family history explorations over the past year, our community at Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies has taken off. This is where you can meet like-minded genealogists who can help you break through those brick walls and find a whole city behind it, occupied by ancestors whose names you don't even know yet. This is where you can learn from your fellow Genies and ask questions, because many in our community have already been into some of the records you're looking for. Genealogy and Breakthrough Strategies is free. What a great place for brainstorming and getting to know other people who totally get your passion for family history research. If you're looking to take the next step in sharpening your skills, here's a great chance to learn from others and give back in areas you've already become expert in. So join us. That page again is Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies. It's a long name, but we cover a lot of territory. Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies. Welcome back to America's Family History Show, Extreme Genes and ExtremeGenes.com. My next guest is familiar to those of you who've been following the show for some time. He is Paul Woodbury. He is the lead DNA specialist over at Legacy Tree Genealogists. And we're going to talk today about Paul's tips and tricks for mystery matches. And Paul, I love this because there are so many people out there who think if somebody doesn't have a tree up and they're an important match, that's the end of the story. I mean, we've got a lot further to go with this, don't we?
Absolutely. And definitely something that you want to focus on are those close matches. And even if we don't have a tree, in terms of prioritization of the evidence and finding the best evidence to help you answer your research questions and your family history mysteries, those close matches, regardless of whether or not they have a tree, are going to be some of the most important pieces of evidence in your search.
Yeah. Well, let's start at the beginning, okay? I mean, most people will now go through, say, on Ancestry or elsewhere and start to categorize who their matches are. Most people know their first cousins. Most people have an idea maybe of where a lot of the second cousins will fit in. And they'll use a little color code to identify which branch of the family they are related through. And then they'll go through also and see what matches are shared. And some of those shared matches are often much more distant. And this is a really good thing because you can use these shared matches, obviously, to potentially break through brick wall lines in your family tree.
Absolutely. By using some of these more distant matches and building out their family trees and exploring their family trees, finding out how they connect to each other, you can better understand how you and your family connect into the further back distant generations. And it's really important to prioritize the matches that are closer because they're going to give you the best evidence. They're your closest matches. They are going to provide the most beneficial information in terms of level of relationship and determining how you fit into those families.
Yeah. Now, you've got then these names all separated out. Obviously, if you find that you share a lot of matches with someone you know, then you can assume they come from that same branch of the family as a relationship. And a lot of people then will say, okay, let's look at that person's tree, and then they can extend it from there. But when you run into somebody with no tree, there are things you can still do.
Absolutely. And I want to start by saying, sometimes when we look at those trees, we can say, oh, it's a small tree. They only have their parents. They only have their grandparents. But hey, that's gold. You're a genealogist. You can figure it out. You can extend that family tree and build the tree for them and oftentimes figure out how those people are related. But it can be a little bit more challenging when we don't have a lot to go on. You click into a really promising looking match and no tree. And that can be a little bit disappointing. But it's not the end of the line. And some of the clues that we can gather from those matches are ultimately going to break open the cases that we're researching. The key there is to consider all of your available clues that are given to you in that key genetic cousins match profile. Those elements include the username. It includes how much DNA they share with you. It includes maybe shared ethnicity. If you have unique ethnicity admixture estimates and they have unique ethnicity admixture estimates, you can maybe explore some things that way. It includes all of their profile details. So click outside of their match profile and click down to their profile for the company. What have they said in terms of their age, their residence, their research interests? They might have an earliest known ancestor that's been reported, or a list of ancestral locations or surnames. They might just have a profile picture, and all of those elements can really help us to explore who is this mystery match and who are their ancestors, because our ultimate goal here is to extend their family tree and figure out how they connect with our family.
So this is how to become a DNA safecracker.
It kind of is. And, I think really it's just evaluating all available clues, evaluating all available evidence to help us figure out what is the nature of my relationship with this individual. Now, before jumping into that, it's worth mentioning that, one way to figure out how these people might be related to you is to simply send a message asking for information about their family tree. I think sometimes as genealogists, we like to sit at our computers, be kind of a little bit introverted and, ignore the world and just, work with the dead people. But in some of these cases, it could be beneficial to find some extrovert jive and try and connect with some of these people and reach out and ask for information.
Don't you think, though, that part of it is we just kind of assume they're not going to respond, especially if everything's private, they don't put a tree up. You kind of assume immediately, well, they were just looking at the ethnicity, they're just following the TV ads, that kind of thing. I think there's just an assumption that, like, I can probably get more from it myself than waiting for an answer. But you're right. I mean, why not at least try, send out a quick message and see if something happens?
Yeah, try and send out a message, see what happens. Now, if they don't respond, this is where some of these tips and tricks can come in handy. The first thing I want to mention is usernames. So a lot of the times they will have at least a username. A lot of times people will say, I'm going to use a weird username that's not traceable to me. But most of the time, usernames are associated with an individual. You might be able to recognize elements of their first name, their last name, maybe a middle initial. And you might be able to determine, what is their likely name? You might have really weird usernames. It's like, this has no bearing on what their real name is. But even in those situations, usernames often come from handles that are used at other sites. So they might be using the same username on their social media. They might be using the same username as part of their email. So it's worth, in those situations, just doing a search for that username on Google or in public record indexes. There's resources like Been Verified, White Pages, Spokeo, Intellius, and many of these sites enable you to do a search by username or search by email address.
And some of them you need a subscription for, and others are free, like FamilyTreeNow.com. And what I love about those places, too, Paul, is they'll often tell you closely related people. They'll give you where they've lived or where they're living now. They'll even often have phone numbers and email addresses.
Exactly. So that really helps you to get a step up in being able to reconstruct the family tree. If you can determine a name, if their username is a name, consider searching for their name in genealogy databases. I think we often think of genealogy for the deceased, but many of our genealogy databases have information on living people. Ancestry, MyHeritage, Family Search, all have public record indexes. Many of them have indexes of vital records. They have indexes of newspapers. So there's lots of ways that we can find information on individuals who maybe have only given their username.
And of course, social media sites too can reveal information.
Absolutely. And before we talk about social media, though, I do want to just mention one last thing about usernames. Sometimes you get numbers in a username, and we can kind of sometimes gloss over those, but those numbers are often associated with important life events. Might be their birth dates or a marriage date, or maybe their graduation from high school. I've also come across recently several instances where people have these numbers at the end of their username, and it's their age at the time they created their account or took a DNA test.
Interesting.
Right. So you can sometimes find what that number might be referring to. Like you said, when you perform these searches on the usernames, you can often find information on people in social media. And that takes us into a whole nother area where you can use social media to reconstruct close family relationships. Some of my go-tos are, if I'm trying to figure out who the parents of an individual are and I found their social media, I look through their posted public photos to see if they have published anything that looks vintage, that looks like it is an older photo of a parent, of a grandparent, of an ancestor. And if you can find those, then often you get the whole family commenting on those photos.
Yep.
And say, oh, I miss Grandpa so-and-so. Oh, this is such a great photo of you and your father, and you get your answer right there. Some other tricks there are to look for what the individual is posting on Mother's Day, on Father's Day. What are people posting on their birthdays if you need to determine their birth date? If you're trying to figure out who they're married to, look for Valentine's Day and anniversary posts. If you're looking for the parents of an individual, look for photos of that individual's children. Because grandparents often self-identify and say, oh, I just love my grandchild so much, So there's some great tips and tricks for looking at social media and being able to reconstruct family relationships based off of who is commenting, what they're saying, and what they're posting on their social media profile.
And you can really take that information and extend trees back as far as you want to go. I mean, essentially what we're doing is we're building their trees for them. And I guess the question would be, Paul, how far back do you find that this is most effective in terms of, if you've got a 10 centimorgan relationship versus a 25 centimorgan relationship, how minimal a relationship are you looking for to work this?
Yeah, really, the emphasis may not be necessarily on the amount of DNA that they share with you. Certainly, you want to prioritize those that are sharing more DNA with you.
Sure.
But the priority really in these situations comes down to what are you trying to research? Who are the genetic cousins who are clustering around particular known relatives and who are likely pertinent to your research question? If we can identify a cluster of matches who are related to other known descendants of the subject of our research question, then building out the trees of those individuals may give us answers regarding who are the collateral relatives of this ancestor that we're researching.
He's Paul Woodbury, the lead DNA specialist over at Legacy Tree Genealogist. And Paul, great tips and tricks for mystery matches. And for those who are just getting into DNA, this is really important stuff for them to know. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
And coming up next, Bill Griffith, the TV financial reporter, is out with another book called Strangers No More. You're going to want to hear more about it coming up in 5 minutes on Extreme Genes. And welcome back to America's Family History Show, Extreme Genes and ExtremeGenes.com. Fisher here, your radio root sleuth. And my next guest has made quite a splash in the family history realm over the last several years with his book, Stranger in My Genes. Bill Griffith came out with this and talked about the shock of discovering that his father was not his father. Bill, welcome back. It's great to have you on the show.
Great to talk to you again, Scott. It's hard to believe it's been 10 years now this summer that I took that DNA test. And that's really kind of ancient history in the world of DNA testing,
Absolutely.
It's really come far.
Well, and now you've got this follow-up book because there were still so many things left undone, left unsaid by the time you got to the end of Stranger in My Genes. Tell us about Strangers No More.
It's multi-parted. The first part that most people who have read Stranger in My Genes would be interested in is to know that I have, in fact, reached out to my biological family. When the first Stranger book came out, by the time the book came out, I had yet to reach out to a member of the biological family. I just wasn't ready, and many people were disappointed in that. How can you not reach out to somebody from that family? Well,
really?
I just wasn't ready yet. I finally did in 2017, and I was warmly received, thankfully, and I have a great relationship with this relative, and I write about that in the book, so that's part of the story right there.
Hard phone call to make?
Well, I wrote a letter. In Stranger in My Genes, I wrote a letter. I posted the letter that I had written to a relative that I never ended up sending. But when we finally narrowed it down to who I should reach out to, I just sent that letter. And I just couldn't bring myself. I'm an introvert, believe it or not. And I'm not the type to make a cold call on the phone. So I wrote the letter and let it steep. And thankfully, my goodness, it took 3 days for the letter to get there. And my relative called me the very next day and was so excited about it. I couldn't have been more warmly received. It was such a great relief.
Yeah, I'm sure it was. And this is a thing that anybody in your situation goes through. Everybody's anguished over it, and some people are worried about a rejection. And yet we see over and over again, that's not usually the case. I mean, it happens, but not very often.
Certainly it happens. I mean, I've heard plenty of stories where that has happened. But I'll tell you, the one, I think, common feeling that most of us have who have been through this is by reaching out to the biological family, these groups of strangers that we are related to, you feel like you are cheating on the family you grew up with, especially the father that raised you, who was not your biological father. I've heard so many people say, I feel like I'm cheating on my father. Well, I sort of felt that way too, that was dishonoring his memory. He's been gone for a long time, but I just couldn't bring myself to do that for a while. But it worked out.
Did you go through a lot of counseling as a result of all this?
Not per se. It's funny you should mention that. About 3 months after I took the DNA test, I reached out to my doctor, my general practitioner, because I was really having a very hard time. I mean, I like to say I was in an emotional fetal position for maybe 9 months after I took that initial DNA test. So I went to my doctor and I just bared my soul to him. And he said, I can give you two options. One, I can send you to a psychiatrist or psychologist who can help you, or I can write a prescription for an anti-anxiety medication.
Give me that.
That's what I want, because I want relief today, now.
Yeah.
So I take the same thing as it happens that I read that David Letterman takes. He has credited with saving his life, giving him a sense of well-being, which is really what, and I'm still on it. I still take it. So.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Now, as a result of this new book, Strangers No More, which, by the way, just came out this past week through AmericanAncestors.org and on Amazon, you've also had several similar stories that have come your way as a result of this. I'm certainly aware of one of them personally, but let's talk about that.
The one thing, when the first Stranger book came out, I thought my story was unusual, if not unique. The thing that surprised me were the number of people I heard from who had the very same story to tell. They reached out for guidance, for comfort, just knowing that they were not alone. That really surprised me. I'll give you a statistic. In 2019, the Pew Research Center did a study of DNA tests, and they determined that up to that point, in the summer of 2019, by that time, 20 million Americans, roughly, had taken a DNA test. And they found that 27% of them found a relative that they didn't know existed before then. That's 5.4 million surprises out there. I'm a member of a group on Facebook of people just like me who took the DNA test and found out that my father was not my father. There are more than 8,600 people on that group alone. So I heard so many stories, people reaching out to me, and I decided their stories need to be heard as well. Some of them are inspirational, some are tragic, but they all have the same common denominator, that we had this shock, this unbelievable shock of learning that we weren't really who we thought we were. Our parents had hidden this tremendous secret from us. So I wrote several chapters, including some of these stories, and I've already heard from some people who find them pretty inspiring.
I'm always amazed by some of the psychological trauma on this, because this is all about something that happened before you were even born. Nothing in your past that you've been aware of has ever changed, and yet everything has changed as far as your identity goes.
And so many people would say to me, friends, relatives, don't be upset. They're trying to comfort you. And I hear this from other people as well in my position. Don't be upset. What are you upset about? Nothing has changed in your life. Well, nothing has changed in my life, but I have changed. I'm different.
Right.
And the way I look at things is different. Relationships changed. That's something that changed, especially with my mother. The other main theme that I hear from people who reach out to me with their stories is the reluctance of our mothers to want to talk about it, which is understandable.
Sure.
There's a stigma to it. There's a shame. There's an embarrassment. And that was certainly the case with my mother. And it affected our relationship, unfortunately, and not for the better. It was subtle, but it was enough that we had a much more superficial relationship the last few years of her life, which is unfortunate. I just didn't want that to happen, but it was inevitable, I guess.
Yeah, I could completely understand where that would come from. Have you found anything new lately in your research?
Well, yes. I have an epilogue at the end of the book. I have mentioned that contains a surprise that's based on another DNA test that I took. that revealed what I believe is an even bigger surprise than finding out that my father was not my father, believe it or not. But I'm going to leave it at that, I think. And I would urge anybody who buys the book, don't peek. Wait till the end of the book to read that. But yes, building a family tree is like building a house. You're never finished. It never comes to an end. There are always new people to discover, new avenues to pursue, new brick walls to tear down. And like you, I love that process of discovery and adventure that is all part of the family history research process.
It really is true. And for people who are trying to get a grasp on how hard and shocking this kind of discovery is, like Bill made, look at this. 10 years later, he's still thinking about it. He's still dealing with it like so many other people, because it just changes your entire identity. But I'm so glad, as a high-profile person who was a financial reporter on television for decades, that you've written this story and given other people the chance to see that they are not alone.
It has been very satisfying. I guess I was naive going into the whole process several years ago to write the first book, not realizing the impact it would have on other people's lives. But it's so satisfying to know how many people I've been able to help in that regard, just for people finding out they're not alone. And that has been very satisfying. And for me, too, it hasn't been a one-way street. I've developed very close relationships, friendships with other people who are in my position, and we've become very good friends and confidants in that regard, and we help each other, which has been very special.
The book is Strangers No More. It's the follow-up to Stranger in My Genes. It's from my guest, Bill Griffith. It's just come out. You can get it at AmericanAncestors.org and Amazon. And Bill, it's always a joy to talk to you, my dear friend. And
same here, Scott.
So glad this book is out. It's going to help a lot more people.
Thank you. I appreciate your interest in it. Thanks very much.
And coming up next, David Allen Lambert rejoins me as we get another round of Ask Us Anything in on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show, in 3 minutes. Hey Genies, Ancestry now has an exclusive partnership with PhotoMine, the leader in photo scanning and archiving. What does this mean to you? Well, imagine inheriting an old photo album and you want to digitize all the images. Up until now, you'd have to remove the pictures, place them in a scanner, crop them, and perhaps use Photoshop to improve them. Now, by using these amazing PhotoMine tools from Ancestry, you can use your phone to take a picture of an entire page from your album. The tools will automatically separate and crop each picture, improve focus, and restore color or colorize your images. Then you can assign which picture goes to which person on your tree. If you've been waiting years to get around to the tedious project of scanning your old albums, it's been worth the wait. No more pulling your photo albums apart and trying to reinsert the pictures back in proper order. No more tearing of your old photos while removing them from those so-called magnetic albums of the 1970s. Sign into Ancestry through their mobile app to try it out.
Have you hit a brick wall in your family tree? Are you unsure how to use your DNA test results to resolve a research question? Do you want to travel where your ancestors walked and need to find details before you go? Need help joining a lineage society? Whatever your genealogy research question, the answer is Legacy Tree Genealogist. Legacy Tree Genealogist has been helping clients all over the globe discover their story since 2004. Legacy Tree has carefully selected and trained professionals who specialize in hundreds of countries and languages, as well as probate research and DNA analysis. And when you need experts on the ground in the countries where your ancestors came from, Legacy Tree Genealogists calls upon its global network of on-site researchers who know the local language and how to get their hands on the records you need. Request your free quote today at legacytree.com. That's legacytree.com.
Hey Genies, it's Fisher here, and my shiny new ExtremeGenes.com website has been described as having that new car smell. I love hearing that. Having been with you for over 8 years now, it felt like time to help out listeners and followers who need to know the basics of genealogical research, as well as how to understand your DNA test results, and to be able to put them to work for you, breaking down brick walls, identifying birth parents, locating new cousins who may have photos and information that can't be found anywhere else, and verifying your paper trails. Yes, DNA can do all that, and I can show you how. Check out the all-new ExtremeGenes.com website and download the free Genealogy Strategy Roadmap and the free DNA Starter Guide. Then, if you like what you see, you can take those next steps to sign up for the video courses that you can watch at your leisure. I'll take you through all the basics, step by step. Find out more now at extremegenes.com. All right, we are back on the job here at Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show, and extremegenes.com. It is Fisher here with David Allen Lambert, back from the New England Historic Genealogical Society and AmericanAncestors.org. David, our first question is from Randall in Baltimore, Maryland. He says, Fisher and Dave, I am puzzled. I found my ancestors' probate in a ledger book, but a friend says there should be more. What should I be looking for? Thank you. Dave, you want to handle it?
Oh, sure. Well, the thing about probates, there are two different sets of records that you may find microfilmed or digitized. Now, the record book or the ledger book is basically the copy that was transposed by the probate court in case the file papers got lost. So what your friend is talking about is locating those file papers. Now, you might think everything is copied over. Not everything is. And I'll give you an example. Say today was 1715. I wrote a will and I left everything to my two daughters and my wife. My two daughters may not be married as they aren't currently today. So the will may not reflect their married name. Now, say I died 10 years later. I never rewrite my will. There's no codicil or a change to my will. In the file papers, you will probably find a receipt stating that this daughter received her portion from her father's estate, and then she signs her name or makes her mark, but it identifies her with her married name. These slips aren't in the record book copies. They only typically did the assigning of the administrator, the will, and the inventory. Now, there's all sorts of other documents they could find, but these little slips of paper that are probably the size of a 3x5 card or smaller could make or break your genealogy when you're trying to join the DAR or the SAR or the Mayflower, getting that connection to know if that probate you found truly is your ancestor's parent.
Right. And probate really is a word that covers a lot of different things. And you mentioned inventory there. If you're really looking to put together somebody's story, that inventory can tell you an awful lot.
Oh, gosh, I love inventories. It's like glancing back through the window of your ancestor's house from hundreds of years ago and what's in each trunk. You know, you find out every type of clothing your ancestor owned, including their old clothes and their best clothes and the new clothes. And it's amazing stuff.
Yeah, it really is. And sometimes you mentioned once it would be a great idea to have a little game with your kids to go cut out maybe a picture that they find in a magazine or something of each item that is in some ancestor's inventory. And it'd be really interesting to see what they possessed.
That's true. And the other thing is you might possess something that shows up in your ancestors' inventory, or maybe one of your cousins does. If something that looks like it's been in the family for a long time, it could have been handed down and listed in that inventory itself. And, you know, the main reason inventories are done incidentally anyways, whereas in case the estate had debt and they had to auction it off, so you have a complete working inventory for an auction, and that's oftentimes what they were used for.
I'm just curious if we see much of that today. I mean, we don't look at many modern wills. Are you aware of inventories?
Financial breakdowns and property are typically listed, not the amount of shoes or pitchforks you have. But I suppose if you want to pay the lawyers whatever funds that they need, they probably could go through your garage and inventory all the nuts and bolts and screws. And that's basically what it was like back then.
Yeah, it's really, well, they didn't have much of anything else. So, yeah, they would have to do that. Everybody needed an extra axe or another pair of shoes, size 10 or whatever it was. So, yeah, they would do those lists. But, boy, I love probate records. They tell you so much about an individual and can really lead in some interesting directions. So, really good question, Randall. Thank you so much for it. And coming up next, we're going to talk about conflicting dates. And, boy, it happens all the time. When we return in 3 minutes with Ask Us Anything on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show. All right, final go round on Ask Us Anything on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show. It is Fisher here, David over there, and we have another listener question. It's from Pamela in Corvallis, Oregon, and Pam writes, guys, I have a record of a related child from 1855. His christening record says he was born on August 2nd and christened on August 5th. He died on August 11th. And Find a Grave says he was born on August 5th. How do I sort all this out? It's a very common problem, isn't it, Dave?
Oh, it really is. I mean, looking at gravestone dates, sometimes it's hard to read them. Or the handwriting on Old Town records. Is it a 3 or is it a 5 or is it an 8?
Right.
Yeah, it's tough.
And sometimes I think that some of the records were indexed and they were misinterpreted in the writing, including stuff that's put on gravestones. For instance, I have an ancestor. The cemetery says he died September 8th and was buried on September 10th. Find a Grave says, based on the records of the cemetery, he died on September 10th. I recently found a record of him that said that he died on September 10th, but has nothing to do with the cemetery. And then there's a tombstone, a big monument that one of his sons put up 70 years after he died, and it gives his death date as September 29th. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh.
So try to sort all that stuff out. So now I'm trying to actually work with the cemetery because all of their records are online, but they were transcripts of the originals. And so I said, can you dig out the original records and see what that says? Because think of the number 29, for instance, right? A number 1, if written fully and completely, could look like a 2, and a 0 could look like a 9. That could have been the 10th. I mean,
or 7 and a 9.
Yeah. You see 7s and 9s, 4s and 9s. They all look like different dates. So this is a really common problem. And yes, it really is frustrating, Pam, when you run into something like this.
Well, one of the things that I find is double dating from the 17th or 18th century. When you looked at a gravestone date and you're like, well, wait a second. What is 1745/6?
Yeah.
The modern dating process would put it into 1746.
Yep.
But when vital records are taken and transcribed, some people have modernized the January to March dates, and you get the 1746. Now, the bigger question, is it 1745/46? Or 1746/47. That's why you always want to consult the originals. Now, the gravestone will probably have the double dating on it, but the original record may throw you, well, the gravestone's wrong, the year's not right. And then reality is the gravestone is right, the transcription of the vital record is incorrect.
Yeah. One of the things I had to learn when I was first starting in this was how it was that somebody could die before they were born.
I hate when that happens.
Yeah. Yeah, and this was a result of this very dating dilemma that you were talking about. But this was at a time where there were 2 calendars in use around the world. And so until we merged them all into the Julian calendar in, 1752, this was absolutely a problem. And it still remains so today because like you say, David, the people who transcribed the old records often didn't recognize what they were dealing with.
Right. And that's one of the problems that we have with modern historians and genealogists having trouble reading handwriting.
Yeah. All right. Good stuff, David. Thank you so much. And Pam, thank you for the question as well. We'll have more questions for Ask Us Anything next week. Hey, that's our show for this week. Thanks so much for joining us. Thanks to Paul Woodbury for coming on and talking about tips for tracking down those DNA matches that may not have a tree up there. And Bill Griffith for talking about his follow-up book to Stranger in My Genes. It's called Strangers No More. If you missed any of the show or want to catch it again, of course, listen to the podcast on Apple Media, iTunes, iHeartRadio, ExtremeGenes.com, TuneIn Radio, or Spotify. Talk to you next week. And remember, as far as everyone knows, we're a nice, normal family.